Right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another fireside chat. And I think we may have some latency issues here because, Bala, I think your camera's, not coming from it through HD. But for those of us who are on live, I think it'll be great uh, to sort of have this discussion. The quota setting is really, as you think about three elements, right? Setting, territory, team management, and rep management. I think that's key to running a performing sales organization. So this is a topic that's very close to our heart. Um, if there are any questions, any comments that anybody wants to add, there's an ask a question at the bottom. Please just ask the question here, suggest a topic. That works as well. And topic suggestion will be great because one of the things we get putting these fireside chat topics is based on what we hear. So this Quota topic came off that discussion that I was having with Yuri last week. So Yuri and I were talking about uh, how do we sort of aligning sales strategy to sales operations, right? That is the discussion we were having. And during the discussion, one of the things that I referred to was the CSO Insight studies that was done. And it had 52% as the attainment number for most reps. And that is a shocking number, right? Like, I think it was like, we have way more tools today for sales than we've ever had. There are more people joining sales, right? Maybe that's why we were just hiring anybody into sales with a heartbeat. Maybe that's one reason. But I do think, how do we set quota? And quota plays a key role. And the fact that attainment is low should scare people. Are we disincentivizing our sales teams that we're hiring? Because sales is an investment. So we're setting these unrealistic quotas, or there's something wrong in the process. And so I was thinking about you, Bala, and we've talked about this topic quite
That's right,
a lot. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do was let's focus on all the elements that it takes to set quota the right way, right? And so the first thing that we need to understand is would love to sort of have is what is involved in the quota setting process, right? What are all the things that people need to consider when they start getting down the path of setting quotas?
Right. Hello, everybody. Good to be back. Chatting is again another topic that I think Dharmesh, you and I have had a lot of discussions about. Very, very close to our heart. But these are it's an interesting study because historically we've seen the attainment numbers sort of continue to drop, right? And as you said, it's sort of counter to this whole idea that we have more automation, more data, more use of machine learning and all these aspects, but yet we are falling behind on the attainment numbers. Now, just to bring that in perspective, 50% of your people don't meet their number. Now, so if you hire a labor force to do something and 50% of them don't do their jobs or are not able to do their jobs, let me clarify that, then you would rethink the process, right? You would rethink how that is working. But that's the reality. And I think there is a lot of it's complex, and obviously if it was easy it would have been solved, but it's complex, and there is sort of a mixture of science and art that's involved in the process of setting quota, and I think that's really some of the things that we should talk about today and address. But to your question, what is a good quota setting process? I think I'll start with sort of looking at what is a good quota, right? When you set a good quota, what does that mean? And I think there is a few factors. Quota ultimately is a goal, right? And just like any goal setting process that you might have, whatever acronym you want to use, SMART goals or whatever process, they all kind of point to some fundamental aspects that you have to think about when setting a quota. The first one of which is simplicity. So is it clearly understood what your goal is and what your number is and what you're going after? Having worked with a lot of salespeople, and not a lot of them are big fans of multiple numbers to look at, right? So they all prefer to have just one number. Give me the one number I should go hit, and let me go hit it, right? And so the more complex you make the quota setting process, the quota number itself, or the set of goals that you have, the easier you make it, the better. I think that simplicity is obviously number one. The ability to be clear, so the clarity of how the process was done, how the number was set, and what are the factors in that number. The transparency of that is also important for a salesperson to sort of understand. Okay, here's my number. I know how it was calculated. I know it's fair. I know it's reachable. It's based on these factors, and here's how I'm going to go hit that number, right? So, I think those we undervalue those, and I see quota plans that have really complex aspects into it, like different baselines, different products included, different products not included for this type of quota, for that type of quota. There's individual quota, there's team quota, there is sub team quota, and then there's a product quota. It's great because you're trying to drive different behavior through those levers, but the problem is you also have to keep an eye on the recipient of that number and say, can I understand this thing when it's put in front of me? Does that motivate me to do what I need to do? Right.
I think that's a huge point because when I agree with you, like that's my experience being right. Even when you're interviewing salespeople, they'll ask you what my
Right.
quota process is and how quota gets set. If you cannot explain it in under 2 minutes,
right? Even 2 minutes is too long.
Yeah, they were like,
opinion.
I'm done. I don't want to work here, right? I want to go on. And absolutely, so simplicity, and then the transparency of how it's been set, right? That's something they actually they deserve to know, right? How it's been set.
Right.
And a lot of times, what happens is I've seen teams trying to make, in the spirit of doing the right thing, right? I don't want to share how the sausage is is made. I don't want to share how. I'll just tell them this is your number, and that is actually a disservice.
That's right. That's right. And I think for those of us that have operated on both the commission and salaried basis, the people that work on a salaried basis, which most of the sales operations and strategy folks tend to be, you really don't understand, I think, the emotional aspect of a commission-based system, right? Which is this is their livelihood. This is how they have to make money. And so not having clarity on what your salary would be at the end of the month will also trouble you, right? If you didn't know what that number was, right? So I think that's an important aspect of setting a quota. Clarity, transparency are two things. And I think the one thing I alluded to, which is motivation, right? So really the whole reason why you set quotas is to motivate your salespeople towards a certain behavior, and that behavior could be, get new accounts, or that behavior could be push a particular product, or just meet the revenue numbers, whatever that is. I think you also have to sort of think about these goals in the sense that the more such aspects more variables you add into the quota setting process or the quota number itself, how complex does that get, and does that at some point it becomes counterproductive to motivating me towards a certain behavior, because there's too many variables that I have to consider.
Yeah, sales guys, right? Like they love to have things under control.
Yeah.
When you put multiple variables, you also give a sense that there are things that are not under your control, and your fate depends on that, and that's not a very good feeling.
Not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling at all. So I think that's one thing. I think that there are other ways to drive those kinds of behavior. Spiffs are a great way to kind of push a certain type of product or a certain behavior short term. So there are other levers that strategy teams have in order to do that. But I think that's one thing that's important. The other, I think, factor that impacts a good quota is your understanding of the assumptions you're making in setting that quota. And what I mean by that is that one of the fundamental assumptions you make in a quota setting process is your ramp time. productivity of the person in that role, right? So when you think about the ramp process, now you could set a 3-month ramp as your basis for how you calculated your quotas, but if that's nowhere close to reality, then you have a problem, right? And so really sort of diving into and understanding the assumptions you're making in the setting process, whether those assumptions hold true, or whether, you, for instance, if you're assuming you're going to get a 10% productivity out of your existing sales team when you're setting the quota, then what is that? Is that really happening? Is being measured? Is that being tracked?
And having that centrally, I think that's measured and tracked, right? Centrally, because what happens is a lot of times those assumptions are being driven at a manager level, and every manager has
That's
its
right.
own view because there's no central repository of ramp information
That's
in
right.
most organizations. And so every manager can have a different view on what the ramp is, and therefore impacting quota
Right.
that they're willing to accept and pass
Right.
down to the team, right? So I think
Right.
that's it. Yeah.
That's definitely one aspect. And I think the last piece that I would add is flexibility. And I think you want to build into the quota process some ability for a level of flexibility, because you are going to encounter a bunch of practical situations where you have to deal with the adjustment of that quota, or provide relief. Or, COVID's a great example of a situation where a lot of companies are just doing quota relief, right, because of the economic conditions that we've encountered. I've seen a lot of companies do quota relief when a product release does not go out on time. So you made a quota based on the assumption that the product would release on a certain date. The engineering team delays it. Now you don't have a product. So what do? Right? You have to provide quota relief. So there are a number of situations like that require a level of flexibility in your quota process. The rules around that should be clear, so managers understand, when these flexibility can be used. But that's also something you have to think about, right? Because otherwise, an inflexible system is very rigid, and you really don't. You'll find it difficult to deal with all the practical problems that pop up. The other, I think, factor in a good quota process is that it is something that gives people enough time to work towards it, right? And this, I say that because I see a lot of organizations wanting to change quota every 3 months, and define a new quota structure, a new goal for the sales team. Well, the problem is, if your sales cycle is 3 months, you're not going to have the runway to hit the goal that was set. Right? And so if you keep changing the goalpost, then it's difficult for the sales team or a salesperson to be able to ramp up and hit that goal as you're moving it. So you have to think about that. While there is a tendencies to say, hey, we'll just adjust the quota, we'll just move the number to account for market conditions or whatever the situation is you're trying to solve for. But you also have to keep in mind, the more you move the goalpost, the difficult it becomes for the salesperson to actually hit that number. Right.
Yeah, so I think that is a really another very important thing to keep in mind, because I've seen that a lot of companies that they're building, right, at different stages,
right,
they aspire. So we have an aspiration, right? So somebody might say, "Oh, we have a company like Conga that has a culture of readjusting territories and quotas almost every quarter. We have a historically they brought in people and said, you'll go wherever it needs to be. Now, that works if your ACV is low, and you can do it. You can make a sales cycle under 3 months, right?
Yeah.
You can meet a number. You got a quarterly target. You met your quarterly target, and you move on.
Yeah.
It may not work if you have a 6-month sales cycle.
Right. Right. And so I think these are some of the factors, some of the ways in which I've seen it done really well, is when these factors are considered, and it's always clear as to what the goals are. And it may be perfectly fine to shift quota around every 3 months, but as long as the sales team understands that that's going to happen, they have the knowledge of why it's going to happen and what does that do for them. I think that clarity in process is also very important as we look at a well set quota, right? And obviously the standard adage that if too many people are beating your quota, maybe you set it too low. If too many people are not meeting the quota, then maybe you set it too high. So that is the sort of the art portion of this, right? Which is how do you get to that right level, right number? But we'll discuss that in the process, I suppose, of how
Yeah,
you go
no, so
about
I
setting
think
it.
it lines up very well for me, like how what's involved in setting the process, right? Like
Right.
the number one thing is really understanding the territory potential,
Yeah.
right? It's so like if you're a fast growing company like a Zoom, uh, you don't know how big a market is, right? And so whatever number that you might put, it's a guess, and you'll blow it over. And so you absolutely want the flexibility then to every quarter update your quota, which means because you've identifying ICP and your ICP fit is always moving. So essentially the territory potential is always changing.
Right.
You thought it is blah, but it's actually blah, and then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I need to sort of up level the number. So that's definitely one. So let's talk about the territory, the quota setting process itself,
Right.
right?
Right.
What are the kind of things that are involved in the process of setting quota?
So typically, the way that you would think about this is that you're going to get a tops down number, right? And you're going to get a number from your finance team or your CEO or somebody that says, okay, we've got to go hit this revenue goal, right? And here's your budget to go do that, right? So the idea of setting the quota obviously is to meet that revenue goal with the least amount of budget that you can, or exceed that revenue goal with the budget that has been provided to you. And so obviously that is the factor that plays into how you set the quota. Now, these things can't be too off balance, right? If your budget is really low and if your budget is flat, but you're asking for a magnitude increase in the amount of revenue, then there's probably something fundamentally broken there, right? Because you're assuming a massive amount of productivity out of your existing team, which may not be feasible, right? So I think that's a high level consideration when you're talking about that from a top-down number perspective. And even from a top-down number perspective, the other thing that I think is important is that you need to sort of look at sales as an investment, right? And that angle, I think, gets missed a lot of times because you are not always looking for a short-term return in everything that you do in sales, especially if you're a growing business, especially if you have a market that you are developing. You cannot have your eyes set on a quarterly number. Right? You have to look at market development. How long does that take to get set up? And that could be multiple years. So you could actually be investing in a market over multiple years. And so you have to look at the returns that you expect to have happen in a multi-year horizon at some point. And that plays into how you set the quota for a developing market versus a mature market versus a saturated market that you're going into, right? So that's another important factor in your tops down numbers to consider. And obviously, once you get your tops down number, then your capacity discussion is important, right? Where are you going to hire? What kind of people are you going to hire? In what roles? All of those will be based on sort of this macro segmentation, where you're saying, okay, here are we're going to go vertical here, or we're going to expand in Europe, or we're going to expand in Latin America, whatever that strategic goals are. Those strategic goals need to be clearly identified and documented, right? So that everybody's on the same page with what you're trying to do there. And you can classify those as, market penetration, retention of existing customers, driving down, attrition, or you're expanding into a market that's unknown, right? And that would require a whole different approach to quota setting than you would in a market where you are trying to retain customers, right? So I think that's one of the key things that you have to do in the top-down process is really understand what are the strategic imperatives that you're trying to drive, write them down, be clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve there. And that can feed into the quota setting process in terms of how you align your quota to those targets, to those goals that you strategically want to hit.
So just to recap on that one, right? The tops down process, we have to factor in is like, okay, we start with the goal in mind.
Right.
We are going to look at capacity. Right? because we have to invest. We're going to put in people. We'll look at our product mix and the penetration. So if the product is like, are we very super penetrated in a particular market, or the product is mature, right? Different
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah,
And then, of course, based on that, we'll build a coverage model, and that's kind of coming tops down. Those are the elements that will all contribute to a tops down number that you will come out with, and it should at least give people on the field a directionally what a corporate strategy looks like.
that's right.
It's an acquisition strategy, it's a retention strategy, it's a mix of both.
Yeah, and it could be by region, by business unit, by product. It could vary, right? So you may be launching a new product, and therefore you want to drive growth into existing customers of that new product, right? So whatever that strategy is, and just like any goal setting process, you want to be clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve and what are the targets that you're trying to achieve there, right? And it could be market share, share of wallet, it could be market development, it could be new logos, however you define what those goals are. And then you start the process of sort of breaking down the tops down number into your various business units or groups that you're going to set, right? And so the return from a developing market may not be high in terms of expectation versus a market where we have saturation, right? And where we have a lot of existing customer base. So you have to consider that. And the other thing also is that the stage of the company is also very important, right? In terms of attracting the right level of people into the company. You have to be in par with the market in terms of how much quota you're going to set, right? So for instance, if most of the SaaS companies, for instance, in the market is $1 million in enterprise rep, then you cannot have a $4 million quota target, right? You won't be attracting the right people if you do that. It's very similar to how you pay people with salaries, right? So I think that's another factor as well. So considering those few things, once you start doing that macro breakdown, I think the number one thing you have to do is get in a room with your leaders, with your sales leaders. Now, this doesn't need to be your frontline managers, etc., but at least the business unit leaders that would be responsible for these goals, and really, get their feedback. And that process,
right? Yeah. On that one thought that just came in as you were talking about, I want to get your thoughts on this is that you talked about business units, segments, and all those things. Mm-hmm. That works in a more mature organization where there is some structure. They have territory, they have teams, and their business mm-hmm. units, right? Mm-hmm. And they are signing up. There is some historical performance number, and they'll look at penetration mm-hmm. mixes and all. Mm-hmm. But a lot of companies that are growing really fast, right? They may not have a very well-defined territory model or a coverage model in general, right? That's and right. They've taken an OTE approach, right? This is my OTE, that the number that I want, and I'm mm-hmm. just going to, multiply that. This is my on-target earning, 10x that, 8x that, whatever the number is. Right. That is your quota, right? How does that? How well do you think? How does that work out in your mind?
Well, I mean, ultimately, you're trying to find an aspect of potential in the market, right? And whether you define that potential through territories in a well-defined market where you can understand, okay, here are the accounts, and based on these accounts, the potential in that territory could be this, right? But as you said, in a developing space, you don't know. Let's say it's a new product in the market, or you're a new company that's launching a single product. You don't know what the market's going to look like. You haven't gotten the historical information. So what is the best approach that you can take? People tend to relate to try and figure out a process for how they can justify the budget spend on a sales rep, right? And so one approach is to think about it as an ROI on every dollar spent on a salesperson. So you could say, if I spend $10 on a salesperson, I want $100 back, right? That, without really understanding the market and what you're developing, can also be problematic, because
I think so. No, I agree. That's like the reason I thought of that was, I think that is one of the big drivers,
right,
on why attainments are low, because what you're missing out in that is the overall, what is the ICP of your market and how big is the potential for
Right.
the ICP,
Right.
and working realistically against that versus just coming out of the number and say, it is the OT 10x, that's a quota. And that
Yeah.
could be an unrealistic number that goes against all the principles we've talked about. It's simple, yes,
That's right.
but it's definitely not transparent,
Yeah.
and it is not easily motivating for most people, right?
And it's not easy motivating, and it doesn't take into account ramp. It doesn't take into account a lot of the other factors that sort of add the nuances to that, right? So if you just, I think for simple, like if you're a really early stage company, it may work because you're simply sort of setting a target, because you have to set a target. You're saying, okay, I need to get to X number of dollars. I need 10 people to get there, I think, right? So that divided by 10 is my multiplier that I need on every person to get there, right? Very, very simplistic way of thinking about it. And, when you don't take into account all the other variables, that's obviously where you don't meet the numbers. But that's a very common approach we've seen. Another common approach that we've seen is to take a market number and say a person experienced in sales for 2 years should carry a quota of 700,000. A person with 5 years experience should carry $1 million. A person with 10 years experience should carry $1.5 million, right? That again is devoid of any understanding of the potential of the market, what exactly the ability to meet that number is not very clear, right? You're basing it based on the experience of a person, but not based on any other factor that would influence that person's productivity in that market that you're setting for them. So that any simplistic approach like that would be problematic, and that's where you need to have the flexibility. I'll go the other way and say, if you look at a territory and you say, okay, I'm gonna figure out what the potential of a territory is, and you come up with a really simplistic way of calculating the potential, like take the number of employees and multiply it by my license cost per employee, and this is how much money you should be able to make in a particular account. That's very simplistic, right? And even if you say, okay, I'm using a territory based approach to set a number, you really have to think about what is the historical basis on which you're trying to do that, right? So again, any process that isn't thought through. Now, not saying all of these factors are important. I just talked about how being at par with the market is important, right? In terms of compensation, in terms of tenure, it's also important to make sure that people with experience get higher quotas so they can go meet it. So it's a multivariate sort of thinking that you have to put into that.
Yeah,
right?
but one thing that I will add to that is, as we talked about the territory-based model, right? I think it's really important to keep a lens on like how many accounts in a given territory do have coverage. There are a bunch of accounts that people like, salespeople are leaving the company. We know CRM data is notoriously dirty, and you have all these unassigned accounts that are just sitting around. People forget, right? And so one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're building a territory-based model is, yes, these are all the accounts, and I have coverage for these things. And so this is my leftover unassigned accounts. I got to figure them out and make sure there's coverage on those. Otherwise, you could have a territory model that a number of accounts will come in a particular way, but if they have no coverage and there's no one covering them, and that's your place where you'll be blind.
And this is really where the bottoms up sort of thinking has to come from, right? So you have your tops down number that you got from finance or your CEO or whatever, and you're trying to figure out how you break that down. But on the flip side of that is you have to be able to justify it bottoms up as far as how that number makes sense, right? Now, for that, there is a number of ways in which you can look at it. One is the territory potential, number of accounts that are assigned to a rep, etc. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the productivity of the person, right? How productive is this person in that role? Was a new hire into that role? Were they transferred in from another part of the company? Is this a market or product that they're familiar with, etc., right? So when you think about productivity, of course, sales enablement and all of those aspects come into play, but that's an important critical factor to think about. The third is you have to have some sense of how many deals do you reckon a particular sales rep can close? You can assign 50 accounts, you can assign 100 accounts, but if they can only work on 4 deals at a time, just in terms of the amount of effort that it takes to work on a deal. Like, how complex are these deals? Is this a lot of solution selling, or is this you're just dialing a deal, right? And so the workload on an individual, their ability to physically deal with that work, is also another factor in consideration. So it's not just about the size of a territory. You can have 1,000 accounts in a territory. It doesn't mean I'm touching any of them if every deal takes an enormous amount of time for me to close. So that's another factor, right? Which is how much time can one person spend, and what is the productivity of that person in order to
So
sort of
again, going
achieve.
back, right, it comes back to RAM, capacity model. What's my coverage model on top of those territories? And so, like, you have to have all those things that in
And
mind.
things like conversion rates, and things like how many deals can a salesperson actually work on at any point in time, how many of those deals would convert. So these are a variety of ways in which you can sort of bottoms up try and figure out how to get to that number, right? And obviously what you're trying to do is try and match the bottoms up number with the tops down number. Obviously you're not going to get it perfectly matching, but you want to get it as close as possible, right? And so in any different
I
angle
think
that you look at it.
I wanted to stress that point, because I think one of the biggest role that a good sales strategy team can do is be that binding glue between bottoms up and tops down. Like, tops down, you get a number because this is what I've committed to the street or my investors, and this is the number I'm giving. But you need to get validation from the folks on the field and get their thing and be able to translate that gap, or come up with a workaround that bridges that piece.
Right. And you want to have some elasticity in that number, right? You
Yeah.
want to have some ability to set goals that are a little bit higher than what is comfortably reachable, right?
Okay.
So you want to kind of think about it. I think you have to look at it from all these dimensions. You have to look at the model from multiple bottoms up strategies, right? From a workload perspective, from a conversion rates perspective, from a productivity perspective. Like, you have to look at it from all those angles to say, yeah, if I look at it from all of these variables and all of these aspects, it comes out to about roughly this number. And that then is a defendable number. That, from a sales strategy and a quota setting process perspective, is that you can talk through that number to say, for a rep that says, how many deals do I need to? Well, here's the number of deals we think you need to work on to get to that number. Here's what we think your productivity ought to be. Here's what the conversion rates ought to look like. And this is what we have seen historically. Now, some of them you may not be able to justify because you're making assumptions, right? Because you don't have historical data. You don't, like, if this is your first sales team, you don't have any ramp data to know how long a ramp will take. But you're making some assumptions. And so being able to show that, I think, is critical. And also consider, from a bottoms up perspective, data outside the company. Right, market rates, that kind of stuff, right? And so I think this process of,
do you think companies should do? Because I've seen, like, we've had a customer, like, who probably could not even run out of the quota process for the entire company. That would basically give one segment away, and didn't do it. So is it? So we think as a good process is obviously do top down and bottoms up. But generally, I've seen that tops down number just float down to most teams, especially if we're growing organization. But ideally, you want both the tops down and bottoms up, right? So the question that leads is, so we know it needs to be simple, transparent, motivating, should have elements of both top down and bottom up. Is that when you do all those things, do you think you have set a good quota, or like when do you know you have set a good quota?
So I think these are all things that you do in order to make sure you can get to a achievable quota, right? And you can justify why that number is what that number is. Now, when do you know that you've set a good quota? When a reasonable amount of people in your organization are able to meet or beat that quota. Right. And so people talk about the little bell curve, bell attainment curve and all that. I'm not sure I'm a big believer in that, but the idea there would be that majority of the people are able to meet and exceed the goal, thereby giving you the ability to get to the number. Now, if you look at a 50% attainment rate, 50% of your resources are being
Not
wasted on
reaching.
people are not, well, they're producing something, but they're not producing the goal, that amount that you want, which means that you are at the risk of not meeting your revenue targets, right? So I think that's the important thing, the
Actually,
predictability of being
I would
able to do that.
caveat that a little bit. You could meet your revenue target, but you will not meet your contribution margin because your magic number or the what your cost of sales becomes
Yeah.
so high because you got these people who are not contributing to what they should be doing.
That's right. And this is where, when we talked about the top-down number, the top-down number is not just a revenue number, it's also your budget number.
Correct.
Right. So that is the number, that the amount of money you have to spend to get to that revenue number. You can't forget that, right? Yeah, sure, you can go hire 1,000 people and get that number, but you blow out your budget, right?
Budget number.
So I think it's a combination of both of those things, right? And the lead times that are there in that process. But that's, I think, fundamentally, I think this process of setting quota is that way. I also think that it's a heavily collaborative process, because especially in an early stage company where things are still developing and you don't really have market data, or you don't have historical data to back up the numbers, your intelligence is going to come from people on the ground. Your intelligence is going to come from your salespeople. It's going to come from your sales managers. It's going to come from the organization, and anecdotally, or even empirically, it's going to come from them. And so I think it's important to involve the team in that process of setting a goal, and making sure that it is a goal that they're comfortable with. It's a goal that they can justify, but at the same time, it's also stretching them, motivating them to do better, do higher, and really understanding that dynamic is important.
So that gets into like, how do you run the quota setting process, right? Because
That's
it's going
right.
back
That's
to the
right.
principles of how a good quota is. It's simple. Is it transparent? Does it motivate me? Transparency means I need to know how you've balanced my accounts, my
Right.
patch. Do I have enough upside potential customer, whatever it is, the corporate strategy, retention, or new customer mix. So I think what he's suggesting is it has to be run in a transparent manner. It's not ops people just doing stuff in the back end. When you run the process, you are involving managers and
Right.
folks, so they know what it is. So
Right.
the question goes is, where do you think, where do we see breakpoints in this process? Where do you think things breaking down generally? Like what are the we've all had our war stories of reps walking out of the room because like, oh, this quota is unrealistic, I'm just going to go home.
Yeah.
You end up losing your best guys actually,
Yeah.
because go somewhere else.
Well, I've actually seen a variety of scenarios, right? So just in past companies that I've worked in, you set a quota and 50% of the people are not happy with the number. 50% of them are ecstatic about it, right? And so that should be an indication that maybe 50% is going to miss their numbers. But you also drive attrition. Right, people that once you give them the number for the year, they're going to look at it and look at how realistic is this, and they're going to leave if they feel like it's not an achievable target, right? So you're going to incur more cost to the organization of having to replace those people, hire those people. And again, this comes back into the motivation. That motivation is not a fluffy thing. It's actually costly, because if people leave, you'll spend more time hiring them, ramping them to get them productive, which impacts your ability to meet the number, right? The people that are in seats right now that can produce the number is obviously less costly than hiring somebody, putting them there, training them, getting them to a point where they can actually contribute, right? So that is an important thing to keep in mind. And I think to your question of where things break down, I think things start to break down when you haven't thought through all the variables, and you can explain how those numbers have come about, right? And both to managers as well as to the sales reps. It's important that the sales reps feel like their managers were involved in the process, their feedback has been heard, and the numbers and the feedback has been accounted for in their numbers, right? And so I think that's an important aspect of them feeling involved in the process of setting the goal for the company. It's also important for those tops down, bottoms up numbers and the assumptions that you put into those numbers to be monitored very carefully, right? You can say, I assume the ramp is 3 months, but if the ramp is 8 months, you're way off, right? In terms of what your goals were that you set for the target. Hiring and hiring plan, attrition, all of these things impact your numbers,
So
right?
let me ask you this, right? If I mean, you'll talk to sales leadership and they'll say the Pareto rule applies, right? I've got these
Mhm,
20% of stellar sales guys who are going to kill the
mhm,
number,
mhm,
and 80% of the people who will just kind of manage it on, they'll just about make it. And then, of course, you have the back end, right?
mhm,
That's how
mhm,
it breaks down for the average of 50%.
mhm.
And there's a lot of emphasis on from sales enablement and other teams to clone that 20% behavior. Say, how do we get the rest of the organizations to level up their game?
Sure.
How much of that is skills? There's definitely some skill involved from a sales perspective, but how
Mhm,
much of that goes back to how the territories were carved, right, or what the product makes? Going back to the elements of quota setting process, right? Because you can have a great guy
Yeah.
in a shitty territory
Yeah.
with a lot of penetration, and he'll
Yeah.
never make his number.
Yep. Yeah, I think the important thing there is not to isolate individuals, right? You want to isolate a pattern. You don't want to
Yeah,
isolate an individual, because that could be a one-off thing. It could be an outlier. It could be whatever the factors are. But if you're seeing that 20%, let's say that's 10 guys out of your, or 10 guys or gals out of your team that are doing that, and you see a pattern in the way they execute that seems to produce those results, you want to replicate that pattern. What you don't want to do is, hey, here's Sally. She always closes her deals. She's fantastic. This is what she's really good at, and you're trying to clone Sally. Well, that could be problematic, right?
yeah.
And so I think it's important to isolate the patterns and definitely replicate the things that are working, replicate the behavior that's working in terms of how you sell. Um, but also look at the bottom 20% and say, what are they doing that is problematic, right? Are they spending enough time prospecting? Are they spending enough? What's the distribution of work, etc.? And I think that's also important to look at. While you look at the top 20% to replicate, you also should look at the bottom 20% and say, this is what you shouldn't be doing because it's not producing results, right?
So as I look at the clock, because we
Yeah,
clearly both of us are extremely passionate. We can continue on this one,
of course.
but COVID, we
Hmm.
talked about this earlier.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a shift in corporate strategy, right?
Right.
Uh, some companies, I was talking to the Alexander Group guys, right? A lot of companies right now, at least for this quarter, they're not thinking of retouching their quota.
Right.
They're going to use this time to uh, reskill the hunters to be more farmers.
Yeah.
But it is changes in corporate strategy are always happening, which
Yeah.
means the quotas have to be changed. Uh, the current way of setting quota, right? Uh, do you think it hampers or enables companies to keep the sales teams in line with the changing corporate strategy?
So I think to be honest, I think the approach that most companies are following right now, which is not touch the quotas that were set, is the right way to go about it, because you don't want to keep changing the goalpost, right? This is a 3-month issue or 6-month issue or whatever the case is. However, what they're doing is using temporary mechanisms such as quota relief, such as spiffs, such as double counting for certain types of behavior that they want to drive. So these are temporary incentives that you can put in place to drive that behavior, right? That you want, and without changing your final quota number, you can give people 150% credit for a particular product sold into an industry that's not doing well, right? Or whatever the case is. So I think that should be the first approach. I think going back and changing the goalposts should always be the last thing you do, and an inevitable thing that you do, because things have so fundamentally changed that you have to reset everything. I think when you're setting the goal the quota setting process, you should keep this in mind. Assuming that something like this would happen, what would I do in that case? Because it may not be a global thing like the pandemic is, but it could be a local situation in a particular market.
Yeah.
It could be driven by a product not being available. It could be driven by localization of a software product that's not available in the market, like Japan, for instance, right? So there are micro reasons why some of these things might happen, and you have to have a mechanisms. That's what I said about the flexibility, right? You have to have mechanisms in order to adjust to the punches of the market with the quota setting process. And SPIFs are a great way to do it. SPIFs are an awesome way to do sort of temporary adjustments.
How have you seen some of our customers, like you working with Tyler closely, and a lot of the customers who come on board, they're like they're getting to this reviewing of the plan almost every quarter now that they're on the platform. How have you seen them embracing this?
I think a lot of them are really understanding. It gives them a lot more intelligence, right, into what they should be thinking about. Now, not all of them are adjusting quotas just because they've gained an intelligence, right, on a particular topic. What they're doing is thinking about how to use that. Locally within the year to motivate their staff. So again, as I said, spiffs or reliefs or whatever mechanism that you can use to help motivate the people there. But I think all of that falls into how they think about setting quota for the next year. Right, and really thinking about all the variables that they can use, all the bottoms up ways in which they can get to the number, and all the things that we talked about.
We are a minute over time, but I think we were like passionate about this. But if there are any other topics that people want to hear, just shoot us an email. Bala at fullcast.io or Dharmesh at fullcast.io, or on our LinkedIn page. But we look forward to continuing this next week with Rosalind.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bala.
All right. Thanks, Dharmesh. Take care.